Right, hey guys, how are we doing? Back with another video from 6. Interesting one. We've got Gojo versus Sukuna, but it's only hands. Be interesting to see this. Are we talking Sukuna with all his hands? Because I think he's got more hands than Gojo then, and I think he's got the hands to win the hands to hands, if you know what I mean. But I also kind of think in my head that Sukuna would win this because he would be more experienced in fighting, considering how old he is, all the stuff he's done, the reputation he's gained. Blah, blah, blah. I kind of feel like Sukuna's possibly got this, but I am not the power scaler, and I am not the one that made the video. Let's see what 6 thinks.
Gojo vs Sukuna ended over 200 days ago. I'm sure
Whoa,
regardless
was it
of
that
who
long
you
ago?
wanted to
Jesus
win, we've
Christ.
all thought of ways the fight could have gone differently. Given how gigantic of a role Gojo's Infinity played in the fight, a Twitter user asked the question of who would win if both Gojo and Sukuna didn't have access to their curse techniques. No 10 shadows, no shrine, and no limitless.
Whoa.
Just basic
I still think Sukuna wins.
reinforcement along with any techniques not requiring an innate technique. To keep things simple, I'll split this up into 2 different sections. I'll obviously cover Gojo vs Sukuna under its original circumstances, and I think it'd be stupid if I didn't go over Gojo vs True Form Sukuna to see if the 2 arms would really make a difference.
Oh, okay, there we go. So we are addressing that. Cool.
Before we get started, be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel, as I greatly appreciate it. I think it's kind of important to get a lot of the things misinterpreted about the hand-to-hand sections of Gojo and Sukuna's original fight talked about first. The first thing I'd like to note, and this is pretty obvious because of Gojo's Infinity, but Sukuna does not land many punches on Gojo. Throughout the entire fight, Sukuna only landed 1 solid hit on Gojo, and it's a kick in chapter 234. Every other hit Sukuna threw at Gojo, whether he was using domain amplification or Infinity was down, Gojo either blocked or evaded. This is not to say Sukuna didn't evade Gojo as well, and a good deal of his attacks. It's just something to note moving forward. Okay. Now we can talk about skill, and I think it's fair if you apply the information to both forms of Sukuna that I'll cover in this video. To start this off, Sukuna has the ability to air jump and can essentially fly, and we see this on a few occasions. Once in his fight with Jogo, in his fight with Yorozu, and most recently during his fights in Shinjuku against both Maki and Todo. Sukuna doesn't seem to use this in combat too often. Like I said, out of all the fights he's had, this has only been demonstrated on 4 separate occasions, but it's what this might mean that's more important to the topic at hand.
Okay.
The only other character we've seen able to air step like Sukuna is Maki, and the way she does it is linked to another pretty broken ability of hers. In chapter 197, after her awakening, Maki describes that due to the atmosphere and the things only she can feel, she's able to jump around on air and the environment tells her how Naoya moves. Given that Sukuna has demonstrated the ability to air step in the same way with Maki, it would make sense that he can also grasp the atmosphere the same way that she can, and therefore have access to the precognition that she was granted. Of course, this isn't the most solid evidence that Sukuna has this precog as well, but given how the ability seems to work, it makes sense that he would have it. When Gojo uses his Killua Rhythm Echo technique, Sukuna knows which Gojo is the real one, but I guess he could just sense Gojo's cursed energy for this. It does seem weird to me that Gojo would try to trick Sukuna's eyes knowing he can sense his cursed energy, but this is way too shaky for me to conclude that Sukuna has the precog or atmosphere sensing, so I'll just leave that up to you to decide. Gojo doesn't seem to have any direct combat skills outside of his curse technique, and since he doesn't fight hand to hand often, it's pretty hard to say when he actually obtained the skills he displayed in the fight with Sukuna. He doesn't throw hands with Toji in either of their fights, and although he does throw hands in the Shibuya train station, it's nothing impressive, especially not compared to what he does against Sukuna.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to show it up. But then he doesn't need to, does he? We don't get to see many feats of Gojo play. Well, although there was the Zero movie against Miguel, there was some hands being thrown there.
Unironically though, Gojo down in this train station is the closest to how he'd be in this fight with Sukuna, where he's not using his curse technique at all and just cursed energy manipulation and physical attacks. So let's go into the actual interactions they had in hand-to-hand combat, and how this fight would differ. I think it's fair to say for a lot of the Gojo versus Sukuna fight, Gojo was using blue enhancing him, but that's not the truth for the entire fight. In chapter 226, Gojo fights Sukuna in hand-to-hand combat while his curse technique is burnt out, and while he doesn't land a hit on Sukuna, Sukuna doesn't land a hit on him either.
Yeah.
And this is while Sukuna is not only physically unharmed, but inside of his domain expansion, which should give him a boost in stats like Gojo mentioned in chapter 15. To be completely fair to Sukuna, Gojo does say you get a buff in stats due to the environment, which Sukuna doesn't construct when making his domain, but counterpoint, even Kusakabe's simple domain raises his output without constructing an environment, and I think Sukuna's domain being a divine technique that just constructs a domain without a barrier should allow him the same benefits. Going by Megami's domain example, which if anything should just be worse than Sukuna's, that means Sukuna in this setting would be at around 120%, a 20% increase. Gojo on the other hand is running reverse curse technique at full blast as well as being cut up by Sukuna's slashes. Using reverse curse technique at this level should be a stat nerf, especially going off of what Sukuna thinks about Gojo doing this. He says he moves well for someone using reverse curse technique at full throttle to keep my slashing attacks at bay. And if you prefer TCB's translations, he says he still moves pretty well considering he's been activating reverse curse technique at full output in order to survive my slashing attacks. There is potentially even more evidence for this in Sukuna's fight with Maki. As for their entire fight, Sukuna and Maki seem to be relative physically, while Sukuna is running RCT to repair his soul and his heart, but when he turns this off as noted by Maki, he seems to overwhelm her with his initial burst in speed and force her on the defensive while he's attacking relentlessly.
But he's also got the other arms in this aspect as well.
Another thing to support this is Sukuna using a black flash that incapacitates Maki even though she blocked it, but then hitting her with another black flash and her being completely fine. It would make sense that Sukuna had turned his RCT back on at that point, and that's why the third black flash was seemingly weaker than the first one, on top of Maki once again being physically relative to him. That seemed pretty long-winded, but the point is simply Gojo is nerfed in the domain, Sukuna is amped inside the domain, and they're still keeping up with each other. This isn't the end-all be-all, of course. Aside from general speed scaling and skill obviously, each of them need to be able to deal sufficient damage to one another in order to land a killing blow. And with RCT being a thing, as well as large cursed energy pools and Gojo's almost limitless amount due to the 6 eyes, this fight is going to last an extremely long time. One thing that could possibly shorten the length of the battle is a character landing one or multiple black flashes. Considering black flashes are completely up to luck, you might think they aren't even worth bringing up in a versus battle discussion, but there are a few factors that can lead to someone being able to land a black flash. One thing about black flash that is an objective requirement is applying the cursed energy within 0.00001 second of a physical hit. That much was told to us back in chapter 48. But in chapter 256, Gojo gives us a much more in-depth breakdown, saying that if cursed energy being applied in that time frame was the only thing special about a black flash, then he could land one at will. When loading a fist with cursed energy and throwing a punch, it's applied in one of 3 ways. The first is the type that will strengthen the fist, the second is the type that crashes into the opponent, and the third is the type that does both. According to Gojo, the timing of the hit isn't the only thing. Depending on the blend of the 3 hits I just described, it's a toss-up and no one except for him can control the third type. On top of this, however, the blend has to change depending on the environment, meaning things like your physical condition and your opponent's cursed energy. Gojo goes on to say he personally thinks that there might be a connection between humidity and temperature to hit a black flash, but the point of all that he's saying is that there is no definitive way or no correct answer as to how to unleash a black flash. But since Gojo can not only time it correctly by his own self-admission, but can control the third type of hit when no one else can from a raw factors perspective, it's more likely for him to hit a Black Flash than Sukuna.
Right.
I do want to talk about the Black Flashes that were actually landed in the fight though, and about the ones Sukuna lands afterwards, because I need to give Sukuna a bit of credit here. I don't see anyone really mentioning this, but while it is true that Sukuna has a way to bypass the Limitless by using domain amplification, that same thing also holds him back in the aspect that it may prevent him from using a Black Flash on Gojo entirely. What I mean by that is that the way Black Flash is described to us, and when you actually need to apply the cursed energy, if domain amplification is already needed to bypass Limitless in the first place, the cursed energy would always be applied prior to the physical hit, and if it was the case that you could apply it both before and after, I imagine Black Flashes would be a lot more common. Not to mention, Sukuna clearly had a plan for his fight with Gojo, so it's not like he was trying to hit a Black Flash on him. This same principle could apply to Gojo as well, since when Gojo fights all out, he uses blue to enhance his strikes, and he says that ultimately means hitting a Black Flash is up to luck even for him. And the way that's worded clearly implies that it lowers the chance of hitting one. In the Viz translation of the statement I just read, or the official translation, Gojo also implies this, saying, when I fight seriously, cursed techniques intertwine with physical blows. In a situation like that, Black Flash is practically up to luck even for me. Once again, the wording here implies blue enhanced strikes lower the chance of him hitting a Black Flash. And you might ask, well, why would he do it then? The answer to that is simple. Obviously, blue is far more guaranteed than a Black Flash.
Yeah, if Black Flash is so, like, it doesn't happen as often, you'd rather use something that you know is going to actually help you out than something that's possibly going to.
So it just makes sense to go for that instead of a Black Flash.
Yeah.
Now, to talk about the Black Flashes that were already landed, obviously Gojo's Black Flash knocks Sukuna out, but a fair point brought up by people is that Sukuna isn't really at full power anymore in the second half of the fight. And while that's true, I think it's equally fair to bring up that, well, Gojo isn't at full power
Either.
Even after hitting this Black Flash and another one, we see that Gojo's maximum output blue wasn't at its full output when it crushed Akito. We know it wasn't at full power because the narrator mentions that blue recovered or had its output restored after Gojo did the chance for it in chapter 235. So obviously maximum output means the most Gojo himself could do at the time, which honestly just makes sense. Sukuna even says himself in chapter 234 that neither him or Gojo is at full power at the moment, and that's again after Gojo had landed his second Black Flash. I'd also like to say we saw Gojo put a hole in Sukuna's chest while not using Black Flash after the third domain clash. We know Gojo didn't use red to do this damage because we've seen how those affect Sukuna and where Gojo aims them, which is mainly at his face. I'm not saying Gojo one-shot a hole in Sukuna's chest with a blue enhanced punch or anything, but I do think it's pretty unlikely that Sukuna just stood there and let Gojo pound on his chest with punches. Obviously, I bring this up to say Gojo's Black Flashes are going to do serious damage to Sukuna, even if Sukuna is at full power, but the rest of the Black Flashes Gojo lands are kind of irrelevant. The one on Agito does blow out its chest, but Agito is kind of trash anyway, and Mahoraga just blocks the other two. Sukuna's Black Flash has a similar argument against it that Gojo's did, which is that they just don't seem to do a whole lot of damage, but it's far easier to argue that Sukuna is weakened than Gojo is, even though they both were. At the time Sukuna lands a Black Flash, his cursed energy reserves had already dropped to around half of what they originally were, and on top of that, due to Yuji's punches, he had lost both output and control over his body. The most blatant evidence that Sukuna is not only weakened, but also holding back, are the two Black Flashes he lands on Maki. His first Black Flash when he's not using RCT on his heart, and is fully locked in and at the peak of excitement, knocks Maki out for a while. She's completely out of commission, even though it doesn't seem to have done any physical damage, like knocking off a limb. But his second Black Flash on Maki, which was his third overall, just knocks her back and she's still unconscious. So, and of course this is somewhat obvious, Black Flash would be absolutely crucial in a fight between Gojo and Sukuna. How crucial it is a bit up for debate because the Black Flash multiplier doesn't really seem to be that consistent. impact multiplied to the power of 2.5 is how Black Flash is described, and I think it's really not said enough how much of an insane increase that actually is. Let's say, for example, Gojo's normal punch without blue enhancements is wall level, or around 2.092 times 10 to the 7th joules. That would mean a Black Flash landed by Gojo would be around 2.0017 times 10 to the 18th joules, which is mountain level. Let me give a bit of a more basic example. If you have $500 and you simply multiply it by 2.5, that would leave you with $1,250. But if you multiply your money to the power of 2.5, you would then have over
it's a hell of a lot more, isn't it? Yeah.
So it definitely is weird when you consider the damage of some of these characters and what they take from a normal punch and what they take from a Black Flash. But regardless of all that, it still is a significant boost in damage. With Gojo and Sukuna being virtually equal in physical stats, but Gojo having the slight edge in hand-to-hand and the higher probability of landing a Black Flash, I think it's pretty easy to say that Gojo would more likely win here against Megumi Sukuna. Even if it came down to a battle of attrition, while Sukuna does have God tier curse energy efficiency and RCT to maintain himself, he simply is not as good at it as an awakened 6-size user who has virtually limitless stamina, and that much is stated. The story sort of changes when you give Sukuna his true form with all 4 of his arms, because while Gojo is incredibly skilled and seemingly even more so than Sukuna, the added advantage of 2 arms, while they're already physically similar, is enough to turn the fight in Sukuna's favor. It is still true that Gojo is more likely to hit a Black Flash, but if Sukuna can properly counter Gojo by grabbing his arms to land strikes similar to how he did against Kajimo, then obviously landing a Black Flash becomes increasingly less likely, since Gojo won't be able to throw a punch. Keep in mind that on top of holding back, no one has properly fought Sukuna in a hand-to-hand fight while he had access to all 4 of his arms, except Kashimo, and we all saw how dominant he was in close quarters in that fight. Higuruma comes close, but he kinda just got bullied. Yuta did hop in to fight Sukuna alone, but obviously Yuta's always going to jump you with Rika. Sorry for the second round being sort of short, but it's
it makes sense.
Cut and dry once you go over all the information from the first round. To state it just clear and obvious, Gojo would beat Megumi Sukuna in a fight where they had to use hands only, and he would lose to Sukuna with 4 arms.
There you go. Fair enough. Kind of like brought that up at the start, and I feel like 4 arms Sukuna. I mean, I know I was kind of joking, but like I kind of had a point as well. It's like, he's cool. Thank you to my patrons. If you want to have your name at the end of every video, I want to be able to watch patron-only reactions, such as the original Dragon Ball series. The link in the description to the Patreon page. $1 a month is all I ask to help support channels. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you for that. And if you want to be able to watch my videos early, or just help support the channel, click that join button down below. Become a member. What do you guys think of that? Guys, think of this? Click like, subscribe if you haven't already. Leave comments down below. Let me know what I should watch and discuss in future videos. I'll see you guys next time.